You started something 6 times last year. Maybe it was a business. Maybe it was a creative project you told exactly no one about because you didn't want to explain why someone who once spent 3 months learning woodworking was now suddenly obsessed with macroeconomics. You didn't finish any of it, not because you ran out of time, not because you got lazy, but because somewhere around the middle of each thing, a new door opened in your mind, and the pull toward it was stronger than anything you could logically explain. And every single time that happened, a quiet voice said there is something wrong with you. That voice is wrong, and this video is going to explain exactly why, not in a motivational way, not in a you're just a creative soul way, in a real, grounded, scientifically traceable way that will probably change how you understand yourself for the rest of your life. Before we go any further, if any part of what you're about to hear mirrors your own experience, drop it in the comments below. Tell me what you're struggling with. Tell me what you keep starting. Tell me what label you've given yourself, because your comment might become the seed of the next video. A video made specifically for you based on exactly what you're going through. Every story matters here. Now let's get into this. Most people, when they hear the word success, picture a straight line. You pick one thing, you get good at that one thing. You stay in that lane, you become known for that one thing. That is the cultural blueprint. The specialist model. It is the way schools are designed. It is the way job descriptions are written. It is the way LinkedIn profiles are structured. One title, one industry, one clear narrative arc. And for some people, that model works beautifully. Those people found their thing early. They stayed with it. They went deep, and the world rewarded them for it. This video is not about those people. This video is about the people who, when asked, "What do you do?" feel a slight panic. Not because they don't do anything, but because they do too many things, and none of those things connect in a way the world recognizes as legitimate. The people who can't answer the question without feeling like they're apologizing. The people who have been called scattered, unfocused, inconsistent, and flaky, not by enemies, usually by people who love them, sometimes by themselves. Here is the concept we are going to explore today: the M-shaped brain. Not a clinical diagnosis, not a disorder, a pattern. A configuration of how a specific type of mind engages with information, experience, and the world. And when you understand this pattern, not just intellectually but at the level of your own biography, something shifts. You stop trying to fix yourself, and you start trying to understand yourself. Let's begin with a question that may have already followed you for years. Why can't you just pick one thing? The standard answer society gives is because you lack discipline, because you're afraid of commitment, because you get bored easily and you need to grow up and push through the discomfort. That answer feels harsh but logical, so most people who struggle with this eventually accept it as truth. They call themselves easily distracted. They add focus apps to their phone. They set timers. They make commitments to themselves in journals that go unread 3 weeks later, and none of it works. Because the answer is completely wrong. Here is a different starting point. What if the problem isn't that you can't commit? What if the problem is that you are trying to operate a particular kind of engine using the wrong kind of fuel? Think about a diesel engine running on petrol. It's not broken. It's not weak. It's not undisciplined. It's simply not getting what it was built to run on. And no amount of willpower or shame or better scheduling is going to change the fundamental chemistry of that engine. The M-shaped brain is not a brain that can't commit. It's a brain that commits deeply, repeatedly, and with full intensity, but to multiple domains simultaneously or in sequence. It is wired differently, and that wiring has a name. Researchers who study human cognitive profiles, that means scientists who study how different people's minds process information, have noted a pattern they sometimes call multipotentiality. Multipotentiality is the latent, rooted word for the state of having strong aptitude and genuine interest across many different areas rather than being concentrated in one. Think of it as the difference between a laser and a floodlight. A laser is incredibly powerful in one spot. A floodlight illuminates everything in the room. Both are useful, they're just not interchangeable. The reason this matters is that society was built, explicitly deliberately built, for the laser. Schools track students into specializations early. Universities reward depth over breadth. Employers hire for specific, narrow expertise. The cultural story we tell about success is almost always the story of someone who found their one thing and mastered it. The Steve Jobs narrative. The Michael Jordan narrative. The "find your passion and the money will follow" narrative. What happens to the floodlight people inside that system? They feel like something is wrong with them. They feel like they're failing at a game everyone else seems to be playing effortlessly. They feel scattered even when they're working incredibly hard. And that feeling, that chronic low-level shame about their own mind, is not a sign of weakness. It is the entirely predictable result of running a fundamentally different kind of brain through a system that was never designed for it. Now let's go deeper. Because understanding the shape of the problem is one thing. Understanding the biology behind it is something else entirely. Here is a concept called low-latent inhibition. Latent inhibition is the brain's filter. It is the mechanism your brain uses to automatically screen out information it has already cataloged as irrelevant. Think of it as a doorman at a club. Most brains, when they've already decided a piece of information isn't important, will refuse it entry next time. The brain says, I've already processed this, it's not new, I don't need to engage with it again. Move on. People with low latent inhibition, meaning a weaker version of this filter, have a doorman who lets almost everyone in. Every stimulus, every idea, every potential connection between unrelated fields gets processed. The brain doesn't pre-screen, it engages with more of everything all the time. Imagine you're walking down a street. A standard brain notices the traffic light. The cafe, the person walking a dog, it processes what it needs, screens out the rest. A low-latency inhibition brain notices the traffic light, the architecture of the pole holding it up, the faded paint on the cafe sign, the way the dog's gait suggests a possible hip issue, the connection between the colors on the awning and something from a painting seen 3 years ago. It doesn't choose to do this. It just does. This is why people with this cognitive profile are often overwhelmed in standard environments. Not because they're sensitive in a fragile way, but because they're processing a much larger input stream than most. And here's the critical thing researchers have found: when this heightened awareness is paired with high intelligence or strong pattern recognition ability, it doesn't produce chaos. It produces creativity, connection making, innovation, the ability to synthesize ideas from fields that most specialists never read. That is not a weakness. That is a genuine cognitive advantage in the right context. But we haven't gotten to the M shape yet. Let's do that now. The traditional picture of a well-rounded person is called T-shaped. You may have heard this term in business or career development circles. A T-shaped person has one area of very deep expertise, that's the vertical bar of the T, and a broad but shallow familiarity with many other areas, that's the horizontal bar. The idea is that you need the depth to actually do something and the breadth to collaborate with others. The M-shaped brain is a different animal. Picture the letter M. 2 peaks, a valley in the middle, then another peak, sometimes a third or fourth peak if you imagine a wider M, almost like a skyline. What this represents is not one deep area and broad shallow awareness. It represents multiple areas of genuine depth, not surface-level interest, not hobby-level dabbling. Real, researched, practiced competence in domains that often have no obvious relationship to each other. The person who spent 4 years deeply inside music theory, then transitioned completely into software development, then became genuinely expert in behavioral economics. The person who can hold their own in a conversation about architecture, trauma therapy, and supply chain logistics. The person who goes deep into one domain until they've extracted something from it, some insight, some skill, some understanding, and then feels a pull toward a completely different area, goes deep there too, and brings the first domain's lens with them. This is not wandering. This is not inconsistency. This is a different shape of mastery. And the valley in the M, the dip between the peaks, is not a failure. It's the transition zone, the fallow period, the space where the brain is integrating what it learned before it climbs the next peak. Now here is where we introduce another concept that changes everything: vantage sensitivity. Vantage sensitivity, discovered by researcher Michael Plewis and his colleagues, refers to the degree to which a person is able to benefit from positive experiences, resources, or enriching environments above the average. Think of it as the difference between a standard seed and a specially engineered seed. The standard seed grows predictably in most soil. The specially engineered seed, when placed in truly rich soil with the right conditions, grows dramatically faster and larger than any standard seed. But in poor soil, it might actually struggle more than the standard seed. The M-shaped brain shows high vantage sensitivity. When this kind of brain is placed in the right environment, one with autonomy, variety, real problems, freedom to draw on multiple domains, it does not just perform well. It performs at a level that can seem almost inexplicable to outside observers. The connections it makes across fields, the solutions it generates from unexpected angles, the speed at which it can synthesize. These are not traits that develop through grinding out one specialization for 30 years. They are traits that develop through exactly the kind of cross-domain living that the world keeps telling these people to stop doing. But when this brain is placed in the wrong environment, a rigid corporate role, a system that demands one answer, a culture that rewards only specialists, it doesn't just underperform, it actively suffers. It develops what looks like anxiety or restlessness or low-level depression, not because of chemical imbalance, but because a high-vantage sensitivity brain in an impoverished environment is like putting a concert pianist in a room with a single broken key and telling them to practice. This is the hidden story behind so much of the confusion M-shaped people carry. The problem was never them. The problem was the mismatch. Let's go even deeper now, into the brain itself. Neuroscience has a concept called the default mode network, or DMN. The default mode network is a set of brain regions that activates when you are not focused on any particular external task, when you are daydreaming, when you are letting your mind wander, when you are in the shower or on a walk and suddenly an idea arrives that feels like it came from nowhere. This is the DMN at work. In a standard brain, the DMN and the task-focused network, called the dorsal attention network, tend to operate in a kind of toggle. One is on, the other is off. You're either focused on external work or you're wandering internally. In many M-shaped brains, neuroimaging studies, brain scans, have shown that these two networks can activate simultaneously or in very rapid alternation. Think of it like two radio stations playing at the same time. For most people, this would be noise. For the M-shaped brain, with its trained ability to hold multiple streams, it becomes something else. It becomes the generator of novel associations, the place where the insight from music theory suddenly solves a problem in software design, the place where a concept from trauma therapy reshapes how someone thinks about organizational culture. This is why the M-shaped brain is not only capable of cross-domain thinking, it is almost compelled toward it. The brain literally generates more of these inter-domain connections as a natural byproduct of how it processes information. And when you tell this person to focus on just one thing, you are not just giving them career advice. You are asking them to override a fundamental neurological process. You are asking the concert pianist to play with one hand tied behind their back and then wondering why the music sounds off. Now let's talk about what happens to this person emotionally, because the neuroscience is important, but the lived experience is what most people recognize first. The M-shaped person typically goes through a recurring cycle. First, there is the discovery phase. They encounter a new domain. Something in their brain lights up. It is not a mild interest. It is a full-body pull. They begin consuming everything they can find. Books, videos, conversations, experiments. They go deep faster than most people go at all. This can happen in a matter of months. Then there is the plateau phase. They have gotten to a level of competence in this domain where it is no longer yielding new territory as fast. The main structure is understood. The foundational concepts are internalized. What remains is largely refinement and execution, and the brain, which runs on novelty and synthesis, begins to get restless. Then there is the pull towards something new. A door opens elsewhere. Another domain begins to call. The M-shaped brain experiences this as genuine, urgent curiosity, not boredom. Not laziness, curiosity, the kind that feels almost like hunger. And then, and this is the critical part, the world intervenes. Friends ask what happened to the project. Partners express concern about direction. Employers wonder why someone so talented keeps switching. LinkedIn rewards consistency and linear narratives. And the internal voice says you are doing it again. Something is wrong with you. This is what researchers in motivational psychology call a motivation through external pressure. A motivation means a loss of drive and direction. When the M-shaped person begins to feel chronic shame about their natural pattern, when they internalize the specialist world's judgment about their character, the curiosity that drives them doesn't just get redirected, it goes quiet. And when that curiosity goes quiet, the M-shaped brain has lost its primary fuel source. This is when people describe feeling stuck, hollow, going through the motions. Not depressed in the clinical sense necessarily, but disconnected from anything that feels real or driven, because the engine is stalled. Let's talk about why traditional advice fails almost completely for this kind of brain. The most common advice given to scattered or multi-passionate people is to commit. Pick one thing, commit to it for at least 2 years, and you'll develop enough mastery to feel the deep satisfaction that comes from genuine expertise. And then, the advice continues, you can branch out from that stable foundation. This advice is not stupid. For T-shaped people, it is actually correct. Starting with depth and then broadening works beautifully when your brain's deepest reward comes from mastery in one lane. But for the M-shaped brain, this advice has a structural problem. The primary fuel is not mastery of one domain. The primary fuel is synthesis, the making of connections across unlike areas. And you cannot synthesize across domains when you only have one domain. You need the peaks of the M to exist in relationship to each other. The second peak makes the first peak meaningful in a new way. The third creates combinations the first two could never produce alone. Telling an M-shaped brain to commit to one thing for 2 years is like telling a chef that they need to master the art of boiling water before they can cook. It is not wrong exactly, but it misses the essential nature of what cooking is and what the chef actually needs to learn. The second common piece of advice is to find the thread. Identify the one theme connecting all your interests and make that your specialty. And again, this sounds reasonable, but it has a problem. The value the M-shaped brain creates is often not in the thread. It's in the weaving. It's in what happens when music theory and behavioral economics and software design share the same mind, and that mind is asked to solve a real problem. The connection is the product, and you can't see that connection clearly when you're trying to reduce everything to a single thread. The third piece of advice is to monetize your passion. Find the interest that has the most market demand and pivot everything toward that. The problem is that the M-shaped brain's value is not in any one of its domains in isolation. Its value is in the configuration, in the fact that it holds multiple domains simultaneously. A person who knows music theory at depth and behavioral economics at depth and software at depth is not just three specialists stacked on top of each other. They are something genuinely new, a new kind of thinker. And packaging that into a single marketable passion strips away the very thing that makes it rare and valuable. So what actually works? Here is a framework to think about this. Not a system, not a productivity hack, a design orientation, a way of making structural choices that fit the actual shape of your brain rather than fighting it. Think of your life as an architecture project. Most people treat their careers and skills the way people use to build houses: one room, then another, with no blueprint, just adding as needed. The specialist builds a skyscraper, one tall vertical structure, everything in a single column. The M-shaped brain trying to build a skyscraper is going to struggle not because building is hard, but because a skyscraper is the wrong structure for what they're making. What the M-shaped brain builds better is what architects call a compound. Multiple distinct structures, each with its own integrity, connected by shared infrastructure. A main house, a studio, a workshop, a garden, each fully realized, each serving a different function, all of them on the same property, connected by pathways, drawing on the same well. The design choice, then, is not to pick your one room and build it forever. The design choice is to decide what your compound's infrastructure is. What is the shared well? What are the pathways between structures? What holds the whole thing together not as a forced narrative, but as a natural ecosystem? For some M-shaped people, the shared well is a methodology, a particular way of thinking about systems, a framework for understanding human behavior, a technical skill like writing or coding that can be applied across every domain they enter. For others, it's a community, a type of problem, a population of people they are drawn to serve. When you find your shared well, the separate peaks of the M stop looking like evidence of inconsistency and start looking like assets. The depth in music theory informs how you think about rhythm and timing in product design. The time spent in trauma therapy gives you a vocabulary for resistance and avoidance that makes you a better organizational consultant. The M stops being a liability and becomes a competitive structure that almost no one else has. Here is the first practical design choice. Instead of trying to eliminate the transitions between domains, structure them deliberately. Most M-shaped people resist their transitions because the world has taught them that transitions are failures. So when the pull towards something new begins, they fight it. They tell themselves they haven't gone deep enough yet. They stay in the plateau phase long past the point of diminishing returns. And then when they do eventually transition, it happens explosively, messily, with the feeling of having abandoned something. Here is the second design choice. Design your inputs as deliberately as your outputs. Most people think about what they produce and leave their consumption to chance. For the M-shaped brain, information consumption is not entertainment. It is the raw material of synthesis. What you read, who you talk to, what fields you expose yourself to regularly, these are the ingredients of your most valuable thinking, which means they deserve as much intentional design as your work itself. A practical way to do this is what you might call the three-field rule. At any given time, keep yourself actively engaged with at least 3 fields that don't obviously connect. 1 field you're currently deepest in. 1 field that's adjacent, related but from a different discipline. 1 field that is completely unrelated on the surface. The unrelated field is the most important one, because the most valuable insights almost always come from applying a framework from a completely unexpected place to a problem that's been stuck. Here is the third design choice. Stop narrating your story for specialists. When you explain yourself to the world using the specialist framework, when you apologize for not having one title, when you try to construct a single-line bio that erases the real shape of your career, you are not just doing yourself a disservice socially. You are actually training yourself to see your own story as messy when it isn't. It's just differently shaped. Try narrating your experience as a series of investigations. Not, I couldn't stick with teaching, so I tried tech, and then I got into wellness. Instead, I've spent the last decade investigating how people learn, why they get stuck, and what actually changes behavior. I've done that through education, technology, and psychology. Same facts, completely different shape. And the second version is not a lie or a spin. It's actually more accurate, because that's what you were doing. You just didn't have a word for it. Here is the fourth design choice. Treat the valley as deliberately as you treat the peaks. The valley in the M, the transitional dip between domains, is where M-shaped people most often fall into shame and paralysis. They are not currently building a peak, so they conclude they are doing nothing. They are comparing themselves to specialists who are deep in their one consistent climb and feeling like they are failing by comparison. The valley is not failure. The valley is integration. It's the period when the brain is quietly doing the work of connecting the last peak to the next one. It has a biological analog, the sleep cycle. Scientists who study memory and learning have found that the brain consolidates new learning not during the learning itself, but during the rest periods after. The valley is the consolidation phase for the M-shaped brain. Fighting it doesn't shorten it. Accepting it and working gently within it, reading widely, having conversations, keeping a thinking journal, actually moves through it faster. Now there is a warning here, and it's important enough that it needs its own space. The M-shaped brain's greatest strength is also its most significant source of self-sabotage. That strength is the speed and intensity of initial engagement. When a new domain opens up and the curiosity fires, the M-shaped brain can go from 0 to highly competent faster than almost any other cognitive profile. That speed is real, it is not delusion, but it creates a subtle trap. Because the M-shaped brain moves so fast in the early stages of engagement, it often compares itself to specialists at the wrong moment. It looks at someone who has spent 15 years in a single domain and sees the gap between its own 6 months of deep engagement and their 15 years of depth. And it concludes, I will never catch up. This is too slow. The comparison is the trap, because the M-shaped brain's most powerful contribution doesn't emerge from matching the specialist's depth in one domain. It emerges from the synthesis across multiple domains, and that synthesis is completely invisible at the 6-month mark. Let's talk about where this brain comes from. There is strong evidence from evolutionary psychology, the study of how human psychology developed over hundreds of thousands of years of history, that the M-shaped brain pattern did not emerge randomly. It emerged because groups of humans needed it. Think about early human communities. Survival required specialists. You needed hunters who did nothing but hunt, becoming extraordinarily skilled at tracking, at understanding animal behavior, at using weapons efficiently. You needed growers who understood soil and seasons and seeds in extraordinary depth. You needed craft specialists, toolmakers, weavers, potters, whose technical mastery over many years produced the objects the whole group needed. But groups also needed something else. They needed people who could translate between specialists. People who understood the hunter's knowledge and the farmer's knowledge and the healer's knowledge and could make connections the specialists couldn't see. People who could take a crisis that required input from multiple domains and synthesize a solution that no single specialist would have arrived at alone. In the language of evolutionary biology, this is called the scout function. The group sends out a small number of individuals whose cognitive role is to explore, gather information from multiple environments, and return with it to the group. The scout is not optimized for depth in any single environment. The scout is optimized for pattern recognition across environments, for quick synthesis, for the ability to apply learning from one context to a completely different one. The M-shaped brain is the evolutionary descendant of the scout. And like the scout, it is not built to stay in one field indefinitely. It is built to move, to gather, to synthesize, and to bring back something the group didn't have before. The problem is not that this brain exists. The problem is that modern societies reward the farmers and the hunters so richly that we stopped building the kind of villages where the scout's contribution is visible and valued. Let's come back to something we mentioned earlier, the concept of vantage sensitivity, and look at it from a different angle. We said that M-shaped brains show high vantage sensitivity, meaning they respond more dramatically to both positive and negative environments. This has an implication that matters in the day-to-day experience of being this kind of thinker. When an M-shaped brain is in an environment that doesn't fit, and we've talked about what that looks like, it tends to generate symptoms that look like personality flaws from the outside. Chronic procrastination, sudden drops in motivation, resistance to authority or structure, inability to complete things, irritability or low-level dissatisfaction that doesn't seem to have a clear cause. These are not character defects. They are environmental signals. They are the brain's way of communicating that the current configuration is not producing what it's capable of. They function, in a weird way, like pain. Pain is not the problem. Pain is the message. The M-shaped brain's restlessness is not the problem. It is the message. The message is this field, this role, this environment is not the right soil for what you grow, which is not a comfortable message because changing soil takes courage and often sacrifice. But it is a message that points towards something rather than just away from something. And that direction matters. There is a concept in psychology called psychological reactance. Psychological reactance is the automatic pushback the mind generates when it feels its freedom or options are being constrained. Think of it as the emotional equivalent of a rubber band being stretched. The more you pull one end, the more force gathers at the other. When an M-shaped brain is forced into a narrow lane, when it is told to commit to one thing, follow one path, stop exploring, it doesn't just comply reluctantly. It generates internal resistance that can feel to the person experiencing it like their own worst impulse. Like self-sabotage, like they are fighting themselves. They are not fighting themselves. They are fighting the constraint. And the constraint is external, even when it's been fully internalized. This is one of the reasons why M-shaped people so often describe feeling like two people. One part of them genuinely wants to commit, to build something consistent, to be the kind of person who finishes things and follows through. And another part keeps opening new doors, starting new things, getting excited in directions that don't fit the plan. These don't feel like the same person, but they are. They are the same engine, with one part running on its natural fuel and one part trying to run on a fuel that doesn't belong to it. The integration work, and this takes time, this is not one video's worth of work, is learning to stop experiencing those two parts as opponents. The stabilizer and the explorer are not in conflict. The stabilizer wants a compound to be real and lasting. The explorer is the one building the peaks that make the compound worth living in. You need both. The compound can't hold together without structure, and the structure is empty without the exploration that fills it. Now let's do something unusual for a moment. Let's look at what M-shaped thinking has actually produced, not as abstract theory, but as real traceable history. Consider what happens when someone carries deep knowledge from music into physics. The entire modern theory of sound, of acoustics, of how we understand wave mechanics was advanced significantly by people who understood both the mathematics of sound as physicists and the experience of sound as musicians. The crossover was not accidental. It was the M at work. Consider what happens when someone carries deep knowledge of manufacturing systems into healthcare. The entire field of process improvement in hospitals, the protocols that have saved hundreds of thousands of lives by reducing medical errors, came not from doctors but from people who had been deep in industrial engineering and then crossed into medicine. They saw what the specialists inside the system could not see because they had the second peak. Consider what happens when someone carries deep knowledge of anthropology into technology. Some of the most meaningful digital products of the last 20 years were designed not by the best coders or the most experienced engineers, but by people who had studied how humans build meaning, ritual, and identity, and brought that lens into a technological context. The M is not just a personality quirk. It is a structural advantage in any environment that needs bridges. And the complexity of the world is increasing faster than any single specialization can keep up with. The problems that matter most right now in health, in policy, in technology, in education, in climate, are not single-domain problems. They are multi-domain problems that are resisting solution precisely because the people working on them are, individually, the wrong shape. They need someone who can cross between the peaks. That is you. Let's come to the ending now, because the science matters. The framework matters. The history matters. But what changes your experience on Monday morning is not an intellectual argument. It's a shift in how you speak to yourself. Most M-shaped people carry an internal monologue that runs something like this. I should have figured this out by now. I need to be more consistent. Why can't I just commit to one thing like everyone else? I keep starting and not finishing. I'm wasting my potential. I'll never get anywhere doing it this way. So here is a different internal script. Not affirmations, not slogans. A more honest conversation with yourself. When you feel the pull towards something new, I have this pull because my brain runs on synthesis. Following this is not abandonment of what I built before. It's the next peak. I'm not starting over. I'm extending the M. When you feel shame about not having one clear path, the people asking me, "But what do you do exactly?" are asking me a question designed for a different kind of brain. I don't need to answer it on their terms. I need to answer it on mine. When you feel the valley, the dip between peaks, the follow period, I am not stuck. I am integrating. The next peak is being prepared. This discomfort is the feeling of synthesis, not failure. When you look at a specialist and feel inadequate, they have a depth in one place that I don't have. I have a width of connection across places that they don't have. We are not competing. We are different tools. The world needs both. The world actually desperately needs mine right now. When you are tempted to collapse your M into a T to be more acceptable, making myself smaller and simpler doesn't make me more effective. It makes me less than what I am. The compound is worth building. It doesn't look like a skyscraper. That's not a problem. That's the point. You are not a specialist who failed to specialize. You are a scout who forgot what scouts are built for. You are a compound that's been trying to fit into a single room. You are a floodlight in a world that kept handing you a laser socket and wondering why you didn't fit. The M is not a mistake in your character. It's the shape of your thinking. And the shape of your thinking, when placed in the right context and aimed at the right problems, is not a liability. It is exactly what the world is currently missing. Start building the compound, not someday, not after you figure out how to be more consistent. Now, with the peaks you already have. From the valley you're standing in today, the picture is already forming. You've just been looking at the individual pieces instead of the whole. If this video described something you have been carrying for a long time, I want to hear about it. What are your peaks? What domains have you gone deep in that the world has told you don't belong together? Write it in the comments. You might be the next video. And if you want to understand more about the kind of brain that this connects to, the nervous system that processes everything at high volume, the identity patterns that form around it, the next video explores exactly that. It goes into why certain people feel everything more intensely than others and how that sensitivity, when properly understood, stops being the thing that makes life hard and starts being the thing that makes life meaningful. That's waiting for you whenever you're ready.